This House will introduce conscription. Now call upon Prime Minister Robin to give a speech within 10 minutes. Here.
Contrary to popular belief, we're not going to set this debate in Singapore because we think there actually is a very real problem amongst countries that have huge military commitment overseas, like the United States, where up to 3 to 4% of its population are fighting 100% of its wars, whereby it's far too easy for politicians to send their sons and daughters to their death without the people's approval, without political consequences. Whereby we think during elections, the wars and foreign policies are barely talked about because people don't understand or don't care about the 3 to 4% for fighting our wars for us. That is why we want our policy. We are reintroducing the draft by amending the Constitution of the United States and any other countries we want to talk about. We will have military service for 6 months to a year, and every time there is a war, you have a chance of being called up and being sent off to fight for your country. That is our policy. The details need not be filled in. I'm going to talk about 3 things. First, how we are going to change the way countries talk about going to war. Second, how exactly should we distribute rights during times of war when it comes to sending people to their deaths? And thirdly, why this policy is militarily beneficial. So first and foremost, changing the way the countries talk about war. It is a fact that during elections in democracies, the main issues people talk about and people care about are issues that they can feel. That's why in every single election, the degree of unemployment between 5 and 7% is a lot more important than issues like minority rights in swinging entire elections. Firstly, that is why we think this will change the way elections work, because it is more likely that people can discuss and learn more about whether we should go to war, whether we should stay at a war, whether we should send our sons and daughters to death if they know their own sons and daughters could be sent to war as well. As it stands right now, all people care about with regards to foreign policy is whether we look strong or whether we look weak. That is the extent of the discourse in the recent war in Iraq. They project their own ideological proclivities onto the war without actually understanding what is going on. The vast majority of Americans don't even know where Syria is on a map. Probably more of you know exactly where Syria is. They ignore the plight of veterans after they come back, despite claiming to care about the troops. That is what happens when you have a professional force that bears the overwhelming burden of fighting a war, and we seek to change how elections matter. We seek to ensure that wars have the mandate of the people. But second, we think conscription will also ensure a less elite-led kind of war. As it stands right now, the elite in the United States and other countries think it's too easy to send their countries to war. Barack Obama is waging war in Yemen and Somalia in secret because they think the people don't care. Even when the war in Syria is opposed by more than 70% of the people, the US is ready to go to war because the elites want it. Because they gamble that there will not be any repercussions on them during an election if they send people to an unpopular war, as long as they get the economy right. That is why we think that conscription will ensure that people know that their lives are on the line, and they will pressure their politicians to go to the war that the people want. That is how we change the way people talk about war. Closing.
So all you want politicians to be talking about during a war, or whether they go in, is the political consequences and whether they get elected next year if they go to war, instead of the plight and the people dying in Syria.
Yes, that is kind of important because you're sending your own sons and daughters into Syria, into the deserts of Iraq, in order to die. And when that happens, we think the people should have more of a say. And if a draft is what's necessary to ensure that, we are happy to ensure that. That sure as hell is a lot better than sending people to their deaths without their consent. Which brings me to the second issue, the idea of a distribution of rights during wartime. We know that a draft violates the rights of the individual to go to war, because you're sending people to war, you could be sending them to their deaths. We agree. That is why we think that it is only fair if being sent to war is distributed amongst the entirety of the population. The first thing they might say to this is that there is consent. People consent in the professional military to go to the military. The problem is nobody from a farmhouse in Arkansas can ever consent to the realities of the war in the Iraqi desert or the jungles of Africa. That can never be taught, and people never ever expect the kind of trauma that war will visit on them. So essentially, currently, warfare is 97% of the country sending 3% of their people to their deaths. We would rather that right and that violation be distributed equally if it were to come to war. But second, we think what is happening right now is that the US military are placing undue and disproportionate burden on that 3 to 4%. What we have right now are soldiers being told that you only be sent to 5 tours of duties in Iraq, being sent to 10 tours of duty after the US decides that they cannot leave Iraq for another 5 years. Currently, American military commitment is increasing in places like Asia and Africa, and chances are people will be continuously sent back even though their contract told them not to. And the military is special because the soldiers are not allowed to sue the military for doing something like this. More than that, in the status quo, the people who are targeted to join the military are not the elites. They are not the privileged, because the military knows that the most vulnerable are more likely to go and join the military. That's why you see the military going to extremely poor areas to advertise, promising them a college education as long as you serve out your time in the army, then sending them to die in the fields of Iraq. We think that unjust distribution in terms of who fights wars needs to end right now. And we agree that every time you go to war, you violate somebody's right. We think if you're going to go to war, you should at least distribute who goes to war equally. We think this policy will ensure that a better cross-section of society ends up going to war. Third point, why this is militarily beneficial. Firstly, let's establish that it is fact that the US is increasing its military obligations across Asia, in places like alliances with Japan, with the Philippines, and even in the Middle East. And other allies like the UK are gradually pulling away. So the first thing to understand here is that numbers are necessary. We're talking about a form of warfare that requires continuity, that requires things like counterinsurgency, that requires years upon years and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of soldiers in order to stabilize the very countries that Toshi wants to talk about. To rebuild a society, you can't just win a war. You need to win the peace, you need to build a political system, and you need numbers, and this is necessary. But second, we think that if a country were to go to war, it must go to war with the consent of its citizens, because if not, it is too difficult to sustain that war. Oftentimes, the only time when people reject a war is when they see the body bags coming home, because they claim that we never approved this war to begin with, so we're going to reject this war and pressure politicians to pull them back. We think it is only if the citizens actually knew what they were going in for, voted for the war to begin with because they're fighting there, that they can take responsibility for that war and not give up on that war the moment there are deaths. For that to happen, they must understand what they are getting into to begin with. We think that ensures that in the rare event that you were to go to war to rebuild a society in the long term, there will be political will and you can actually prosecute their war to a successful conclusion. We think it is patently unfair that 3 to 4% of the country is being sent to their deaths while the rest enjoy normal life. We aim to change that, and that's why we propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now I call for leader position, Koa Nigra. Here.
I said it. You didn't. You said it. No, you said there's not something. Said it. Okay, take it out.
Robin assumes.
Oh, sorry, wait. Right. Sorry.
Robin assumes that the only way in which the average citizen can repay their duty towards the state is through security. We on opposition think that there are other ways to contribute to social security and to the national prestige of the state. On opening opposition, we decry the idea that states are forcing a certain burden in the mistaken concept that this is actually duty. And that's why we're very proud to stand on the opposition. We're going to give you 3 things from the opening opposition in the context of today's debate. Firstly, we're going to look at what kind of duty people have towards the state, why conscription does not fit into the concept of duty that is expected of each citizen. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how conscription actually undermines the very efforts that Robin tried to create, how it undermines state security, how it undermines state national prestige. Thirdly, my partner is going to talk about how by taking this proposal, you are actually going to create 2 factions. Those people who are not eligible for conscription, those people who are eligible for conscription, how these people are going to lack conformity, how this is going to destroy unity. That's what we're going to talk about on opening up. But before that, several points of rebuttal. 1, Robin assumes that there is no discourse in the status quo about military offences that are taking place abroad. As if the Obama campaign in 2008 did nothing except talk about how they were going to close Guantanamo, how they were going to withdraw from Iraq, how they were going to try and pull out as quickly as possible from Afghanistan. When a presidential campaign says its main points in what they are going to talk about, no thank you, is about what they are going to do, is about when they are going to withdraw and how they are going to withdraw. We think that that is enough discussion. Second, they talk about how the elites don't care about the military, as if John McCain did not spend many years of service with the US Armed Forces, Mr. Speaker. There are many ex-congressmen who are ex-military, right? There are people who have children, sons and daughters inside the military taking active duty, Mr. Speaker. We don't think that elites have no interest. Even if that was not the case, Mr. Speaker, we think it's not the interest of the politician to listen to these people all by themselves. The politicians are elected by a myriad variety of people in order to ensure that they can balance particular interests. They can balance the idea of national prestige and balance the idea of peaceful approach, Mr. Speaker. We don't think it wise for politicians to weigh in overly on the idea that we don't want to go to war. We think that actually clouds the rationality of these politicians. Next, they talk about how soldiers are not allowed to leave and they are forced to take part in active duty. 1, we think that that is a systemic problem that can easily be solved without resorting to conscription. 2, if they do not really want to go into Afghanistan or go into Iraq, get discharged from the military. Leave, right? We're not forcing you to stay there. That's the whole point of a voluntary military force. Next, they talk about how counterinsurgency efforts, numbers mean everything. No, numbers doesn't mean everything. Skill and coordination means everything, Mr. Speaker. Numbers are secondary. You can't teach counterinsurgency operations in 1 year or 6 months, Mr. Speaker. You have to teach them many ways. And if numbers are necessary, hire private military contractors like Academy, G4S Security. No, thank you. There are 75,000 private military contractors still based in Iraq, still carrying out military operations on behalf of the United States. We don't think that you need to supplement that number using draft forces. So moving on to the first point, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
We agreed that Guantanamo was an agenda in the last election. How did that turn out?
That didn't turn out very well, precisely because Obama had to balance interests. We're not trying to weigh in on politics here. Secondly, they're trying to close Guantanamo. They've already got 50 people out of there and they're trying to close it. It's not like Obama's not doing anything. There have been several attempts. And if you didn't notice, Obama's already out of Iraq now. So yes, we do have some progress. Moving on to the first point about duty. You assume, Mr. Speaker, as the opening proposition, that the only way in which people can contribute to state security and national prestige is through security issues. Join the military, fight for the army, join the Air Force, and so forth. We think that there are other ways and other perspectives towards the state other than just military affairs. If you have a great corporation like Apple, then you are contributing to state prestige. If you are working inside agriculture in California, trying to raise durum flour inside California, Mr. Speaker, then you are contributing to state prestige because you are contributing to the agriculture that feeds the citizens of your country. We think that there are more ways to contribute towards state prestige. There are more ways to contribute to the state in general. What you are doing under their model is merely saying that, look, the only way in which you can fulfill your duty towards the state is by contributing to military affairs. We think that this is bad for a couple of reasons. One, we think you're forcing a version of state duty on your citizens. You are saying that the only valid way in which you can contribute to the state is through national service, is through patriotism shown through by trying to kill yourself inside certain situations. We think that that is wrong. Two, you are undervaluing the contributions that that these people make ain't part of their daily economic activities. No, thank you. You are saying that if you are working for Apple and trying to raise prestige, if you are raising cattle in order to make sure that you can export American beef and therefore it's prestige, you are not doing as much as that if you are putting your life on the line than if you are fighting in Iraq. We think that this is bad. We think that is unfair. We don't think that is something that the state should sanction. 2. Moving on to the idea about the military and war. This nicely tackles, no thank you, with the idea that Robin presented to you about how conscripts actually make an effective fighting force. Mr. Speaker, the fact remains that you're only going to have 1 year of training, or maybe 3 months of training. The fact remains, Mr. Speaker, that the majority of people who died in the Vietnam War, like 40,000 people a month, 30,000 people a month, these people, most of them were drafts. Most of them were conscripted into the United States military, Mr. Speaker. Drafts die earlier precisely because they don't get the experience training that they deserve and that they merit in order for them to be sent to the field. But the fact that they are undertrained, unorganized, and have low morale means that these people are incapable of carrying out these kind of state operations, which is precisely what Robin wants to say when he says that he wants to send the United States Navy into Singapore. We think that there are a couple of reasons why this is bad, right? 1, we think that the more people die, the more you actually have oppression and power inside the state to oppose that war. The only reason that the Vietnam War actually started getting lots of opposition inside domestic politics is because people saw loads more body bags coming home, which were the bodies of conscripts, which were the bodies of people drafted into the military. No, out of time. And then we think that that is bad because you are actually undermining your state interest, right? You are harming your state's opportunity to carry out your state interest. You have an vested interest in having your army remain in Iraq, having your army remain in Vietnam and carrying out your operations. But your own drafts dying and then coming home in body bags prevents that because people are now so opposed to war, you have no choice but to turn back, Mr. Speaker. We think that this makes the state look weaker. It made the United States look weaker when they left Vietnam. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, we think that there are more duties to the state than just giving your life on the line, and we are very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. Now I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister, Ryosuke.
Mr. Speaker, the war is not engaged by the military alone. The war is engaged by the collective entity, nation state. So that is why, Mr. Speaker, we say the collective entity, the nation state, have to share the burden of the war. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the distribution of the right, we have to distribute that kind of burden equally to the people on the ground. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, the most fair the distribution, the most fair way of the distribution of the burden is a conscription. That's why we have to propose this particular motions. I'm going to talk about one new materials, but before that, a few points of rebuttals to their case. Firstly, they talked about, there are so many ways in which the citizens can contribute to the war. First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, they basically admit that the individual on the ground have to contribute to the war because, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, the citizens with democracy decide to enter the war. The problem here is how to engage with war. The we say the conscription is most fair. I'm going to talk about further in my first argument. Secondly, they talked about, they say, like, unifying the way of the contribution to the war is particularly unacceptable because when they try to unify the contribution of the war, they degrade the people who are working for the Apple or whatever it might be. We don't think that is necessarily the case. Even if we implement the conscription, it doesn't necessarily mean we say working in the Apple is bad or something like that. So therefore, even if we implement this particular policy, the degradation will not happen
Yes,
in the first place. No, so therefore their argument is completely wrong. On the second level, they talked about like the people who are who are enlisted into the military because of the conscription are more likely to die earlier. So therefore, the kind of expertise is particularly necessary. We say this is not necessarily the case. Firstly, because we can train the individuals by giving the training and things like that, so therefore we can improve the kind of ability of the individuals in the first place. On the second level, Mr. Speaker, we say if we have the much number, we have the many citizens in the military, we can mitigate the harm to the citizens, to the military officers in the first place. Let's take a look at the people who are working for the military in Iraq. Because the 1 million or 1 officers have to stay in Iraq for two long hours, 2 long days. So therefore they are more likely to suffer from the PTSD and things like that. If we have so many number of the people in the military, we can quickly call the individuals back to the America and send the other person to the Iraq. So therefore the possibility of the PTSD are more likely to be decreased. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, because we can mitigate the kind of the harm, the kind of possibility, we say that expertise doesn't matter in this particular debate. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, even in our paradigm, the person with the expertise will continue to work. Maybe the police officers, generals, are continuing to they will continue to they will continue to fight, engage with war. But therefore, the ability of the military doesn't get damaged by this particular policy. But before moving on to my first argument, sure.
How are the researchers at Lockheed Martin creating state-of-the-art military technology to keep our boys safe on the ground, not contributing to war?
Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, we just force the individuals to go to the war by randomly. Just because we implement this particular policy, these kind of persons who are engaged with the technological development will continue to contribute to the military. So therefore, we don't think just because we implement this particular policy, the contribution will not decrease. So therefore, their POI is just meaningless. Let's move on to our first issue about why this is particularly good for the social engineering in the United States of America. So we have to recognize what kind of context we are specifically talking about. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, in the status quo, the United States has some kind of social division between the rich and poor. What is happening in this particular society is because of this connection between the rich and poor, or a particular ethnicity and a particular ethnicity, they are less likely to understand each other. What is precisely problematic in this particular problem is because they don't understand other people, they are less likely to think deeply about the other people's things. Why is that so important in this debate? First and foremost, as Robin clearly told you, beautifully told you, that if the individuals cannot take care of the other citizens, they are more likely to go to the war without the cost on the people on the ground. They are less likely to think that maybe the Yale graduates are less likely to think about the citizens who are engaging with war coming from the very slum in Detroit or whatever it might be. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, by putting every single citizen into one unit, allow individuals to have some kind of connection each other, facilitate individuals to think deeply. So therefore, this is very particularly important because, Mr. Speaker, on the first level, we don't think there is any viable means to facilitate that kind of social engineering in the first place. There are so many even though the government can do something they can do many activities. It is impossible for the government to facilitate the kind of mutual interaction between the poor and the rich, ethnic and ethnic. So therefore, we say that this kind of because the military have to fight together, eat together, stay together. So we say that kind of matter, the kind of social engineering can happen in the proper way. Secondly, why is it so important in this debate? Firstly, because we think that if we have that kind of social engineering, the mutual confidence, the mutual trust, that we say the stability will come to the society. Why? Because at the end of the day, if the individuals can think about other people, they are less likely to harm to others, they are less likely to decide to harm to others and things like that. This is very important particularly in the United States of America. Because in the United States of America, in the status quo, unfortunately, the many citizens do not assume the individuals as the important people. That's why, Mr. Speaker, even in the United States of America, still we have the hate crime, we have some kind of crime against specific individuals who are belonging to other community, such as the black community and things like that. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, we say this policy is not only about the war, this is about the society. So because we can facilitate the mutual confidence, the social engineering, this policy must stand.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Now I call for Deputy Leader of Opposition, Mr. Ono. Here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. We have two military attacks on our side. Obviously, our opposition side are going to win this debate. I'm going to talk about three things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to directly engage the Prime Minister's speech. Secondly, what's the definition of modern security in the first place, on which their entire assumption and case is predicated upon. The third of all, those who cannot participate in conscription will be unfairly disregarded and marginalized in the community, which exacerbates social division that they are trying to defend on their side of the house. It's rather counterproductive, because conscription will essentially inherently polarize and fragment society. So firstly, the rebuttals to the Prime Minister's speech. The reason why they think the distribution of burden is necessary is because this kind of issue related to warfare is not the center of political discourse in the status quo. I don't understand the context of the debate that they set up. If conscription is really necessary, at that time, the threat is there. If the threat is so urgent and emerging, people have already understood the seriousness. Politicians have already, make that kind of issues very important in the election, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, we don't think the context that they set up is really necessary and appropriate in the debate. More than that, even if some sort of the number of military personnel is necessary, why not use private military contractors like executive outcomes or the Blackwater, which is conceptually mutually exclusive with what they have proposed, because we do not think it's legitimate to impose one particular burden upon individual citizens in the first place. But secondly, they say that actually those who engage soldiers in warfare do not really consent to the actual consequence of warfare. It's not really inherent or intrinsic to soldiers. It's same for any jobs. I didn't consent for the consequence of becoming college students. Sir. I thought I would be dancing off the wall like Michael Jackson, but I'm continuing debating, Mrs. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. So we don't think, not consenting to the actual consequence is intrinsic to the intrinsic problem to the soldiers in the first place. Number three, even if accident occurs, soldiers are not allowed to sue. That's a matter of system. We're more than happy to change that if that's the problem. That's not the reason to distribute the burden upon all individual citizens in a society. That's just wrong way around. Number two, second argument or second issue. What's the definition of modern security? Notice, everyone, the entire assumption of that side of the house is security is all about having military, having strong military power or weaponries. No. Modern security is more about economic complementarity among nation states. The reason why countries do not easily proclaim warfare is not because many countries have nuclear power or weaponry or drones. It's because they have economic interests or diplomatic or political interests to pursue. That's why North Korea, I don't know, I don't come up with any crazy example, but that's why countries do not easily proclaim warfare, even though some kind of hostility or tension exists in a diplomatic relation, Mr. Speaker. For example, as my partner told you, working is necessary and a significant contribution to the economy of the nation state, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. This kind of economic contribution is tantamount to defending your country because it's also security, a part of security. If there is an amicable economic relation between two countries, there's a less likelihood that warfare is going to occur in the first place. I will take you now.
The conscription is 6 months to a year. If you want to be a farmer after being a soldier, that's fine. It's good timing, your orange would have grown.
Alright, first of all, that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about now. Secondly, that's not really unique benefit or nature of the introduction of conscription in the first place. We don't think that kind of overgeneralizing, generalization can legitimize your case in the first place. But what we have to recognize today is it's principally important to recognize the fact that everyone has a right to contribute to defending country in variety of number of ways. That's the right of individual. We are talking about liberal democracy like the United States of America. People have different perception of defending countries. People have different perception of contributing to the nation state. If you're working, that's a legitimate contribution to the security of your country because that kind of economic contribution is minimizing the probability of warfare in the first place. We don't think fighting like Sylvester Stallone is the only contribution for the security of your countries in the first place. Therefore, their premise or assumption of the entirety of the case is technically wrong in the first place. Moving to the final issue in the debate. Notice, there are some people who cannot take part in conscription for a variety of reasons. For example, the disabled people, which is Jehovah's Witness, Jewish people trying to be rabbi in synagogue in Israel, or football players in Korea. These are the people who cannot opt in their system. What is going on right now is these people who are not able to fight are disregarded or unfairly marginalized and disenfranchised by the public, Mr. Speaker. They say social division should be, consolidated under their paradigm. Number of responses here. First of all, the conscription is not the unique solution to consolidate the social division in the first place. Secondly, the conscription has been introduced in Korea. Why crime rate is so high? Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, that's because they don't really feel the sense of belonging and unity just because they joined the military service in the first place. What we have to say in this debate is those who cannot fight are unfairly disregarded because people think that, risking their lives or paying ultimate cost is the most legitimate contribution to the society, right? The sense of belonging of these people who are able to contribute to join the military service might be strengthened. But the division between those who cannot participate in the military service and those who are able to participate in the military service, this division, this social polarization will get further intensified or reinforced under their paradigm, Mr. Speaker. Why this is uniquely significant in the debate? Because this kind of social polarization or fragmentation will undermine the state's ability to carry out war effectively, which directly clashes with their second argument, or third argument, Mr. Speaker. We don't think this proposal is effective in terms of prosecution of warfare. If the social division gets exacerbated, we don't think that's an effective way to carry out warfare. So for all these reasons, we are happy to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Now,
Last time I checked, private military contractors like Blackwaters are unaccountable actors who will not be civilly sued or criminally be liable, nor have tried in military. That's a fact. What they're saying is ultimately we should leave it up to these unaccountable actors anyway to simply compromise our accountability and efficiency, and that's going to be happily be a better option than the trained military who's prepared for these wars in this context. So there are three extensions to bring you on the floor. First, we're going to explain how the informed decision would be likely to happen in our paradigm. Secondly, we're going to directly take the challenge of counter-problem opening competition by giving it specific comparative advantage of military over the unaccountable actors, such as private military contractors, such as drones. And finally, why the state has the right to prepare for a situation to preserve national security. But before that, let's clarify our context. Obviously, the context is when these conscriptions are going to happen, and to be prepared for about 6 months, as Kip has already asked in the point of information, has been neglected by Mitsushi, right? It's often the case these trainings happen, and after 6 months, people are able to go back. Obviously, in necessary cases, they have to go to wars in unnecessary cases, such as interventions, such as when they're being fought. Obviously, we accept that, but we have to recognize this context to beforehand. That's a realistic stance we're going to take this debate. Because obviously, it's not, and moreover, it's not often the case. If the moment you go to war, you're going to be shot in the front line. That's obviously ridiculous. That it's more sophisticated than that. Obviously, these people are not all the people like working and shooting in the front line. They're all subordinates. They're also supporters. These are the individuals. It's not like we're making them extend to capital punishment or etc. Right? Obviously, military is a place, and war is the same that you have much more safety than that. Having that clarified, let's rebut their case. The first thing we heard was there's other ways to simply contribute to the state. Firstly, principally agree with duty in certain occasions, but secondly, we say the money is inadequate, or the principle doesn't really stand. Because according to your logic, if you pay money, you don't have to go to jury because you did enough duty in that occasion, right? Obviously, you have to do reciprocal to the rights and security that you're going to. Obviously, that's a crazy logic coming from them, or probably operates in debate utopia. But three, we say the compromisation right is not to that hardship extent. As we have already clarified in my context, it's not often the case that we compromise of the right to die, right to live, etc. It's often the case we're compromising their lifestyle choices or right to mobility in the same way as juries. We don't think it's not really pragmatic. Obviously, we accept in certain cases there is tremendous tragedies that happen in certain occasions, but we say that is perfectly legitimate. So, and then they said there's, go.
Okay, so Robin's workability of your proposal is that because people see conscripts coming home in body bags, people are able to look at the four horrors of war. Under your paradigm, people can't look at the four horrors of war because they don't come home in body bags. So why are you doing conscription?
You're really misunderstanding your nuance. Obviously, society is not that simple. We're talking different. It's about the context is different. We're just explaining that. You should listen more carefully. So, first extension, how the informed choice is likely to happen in our paradigm. Opening up already talk about how these black ghettos are the ones who are being coerced to it. And we'll say further. Firstly, there's the ones who we say it's likely the case that getting a taste in this occasion will lead to more stemming up to your choices as a career of military as well. Because we will suggest, unlike in schools, unlike in other places, it's a place to chance to realize as a career option to make it military as a valid option as well. We think that's a fundamentally legitimate choice for individuals to make, especially when you say that only people from black ghettos are going into military right now, and this white man from the rich middle class is not having the opportunity. We see that likely the choice, it's rather choice is likely to be secured in our paradigm. Because if you say some people are not informed of choice, some people are not being informed of the choice right now. We're protecting more people on this side of the house. No, thank you. Second extension, how to comparative advantage of military. Because what we're going to compare is like private military contractors or drones. Because what we have to recognize here is military's number is obviously lacking. No matter how much, that's why they conceded to this idea of like private military contractors or drones. We see troops are much more accountable, and that's why it's necessary. Let's compare. First, regarding private military contractors, did you realize the reason why NBC has supported the war on Iraq was it was be supported and had connection with companies and industries which makes weapons? Do you agree with the fact that Blackwater soldiers were conducting war crimes in Iraq or Afghanistan? Precisely because these are the actors who are dispatched from these unaccountable actors, and moreover, don't have the possibility of being tried in civil or military courts. These are the actors who have conducted one of the brutal crimes against humanity. No, thank you. we say that's why it's unaccountable. That's why we should let everyone to decide, not decided by the private motive corporation who want to seek for its profit, just for sake of efficiency and compromise their accountability. Second, let's compare with like drones, like how it happening. For instance, we point to the idea in Pakistan, no thank you, 2,000 people were killed by drones, so innocent citizens were killed, and 500 of them were children. We say precisely, even if you leave it as unaccountable actors like drones, no thank you, because of necessity, when you have to fight wars in certain occasion, you ultimately compromise the accountability. How is this damaging? This is damaging on two levels. First, this is damaging because you're going to simply decrease accountability, which liberal democracies like the United States and probably Singapore stands by as well. But second, it's going to lead to antagonizing local civilians because it's a rhetoric to decrease local legitimacy, and it's going to be rhetoric of enemy propaganda, especially in context when civilians were killed in this context. Yes, Toshi.
If you make it impossible to go to war because people are willing to sacrifice their own people, they're more likely to use proxy forces like PMCs, like drones, to fight these wars, which you say are extremely dangerous.
Obviously, the context, you have to compare here, right? There are certain instances when you have to go to wars and you cannot use troops, it's likely that you're going to use this, obviously. That's why 0.0i doesn't stand. Final substandard, why the state has a right to have secure for national security. Because having military directly means to preserve safety as firstly as form of deterrence, but secondly as a sense of security. Because when you feel the military is backing you up and you have a guarantee that the military is actually helping your securing the border, you feel that sense of security, obviously. And we always compromise civil liberty in times of war. We force to evacuate people from certain areas. We force state to control the diet in certain occasions, take away the right from civilians and politicians. We elect president to make the proxy decision on behalf of politicians. So the state has this right already in this occasion. And action military is not a compromise, we're not like torturing them. We're only compromising right to mobility or right to lifestyles, and it's necessary circumstances. We say it's a necessary duty. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we extend.
Thank you, Member of Government. Now I call for Member of Opposition, Yoshiaki Kihara. Here.
If you don't mind, I'm going to wait for my partner who went to the bathroom. He'll be back very shortly. Hopefully. Okay, this is getting unbearable, so I'm going to start now. Ladies and gentlemen, what the government side of this debate are talking about is basically this. Because we are sacrificing some people and killing some people in this country for national security, let's make sure everyone dies and everyone gets hurt for this process. We believe that especially as a closing opposition, we believe that the burden is going to the right member of people who are voluntarily going to these wars, who are actually more privileged and actually they're better off than most people who are in average society. Despite the myths that the liberal media wants to portray, there are more richer people in military, there are less ethnic minorities in military precisely because they don't have the necessary education to get there. I'm going to talk about two things in this debate. First, I'm going to talk about why the burden is currently being shared fairly, even if it was not evenly distributed, and how this policy just shifts the burden to people that are actually poorer, are less off, and are able to make no choice on those issues. Second, I'm going to talk about why it's going to be impossible to go to any war whatsoever, and even if they are able to, the way they're going to prosecute these wars will be through proxies, such as PMCs, such as drones, such as all those things that they said were so dangerous and should never be used. But some rebuttals. First, they said, we want to we're allowed to take away people's rights because, there are certain duties to the state. Ladies and gentlemen, we already do that through taxation, through many kinds of services. If you're saying that fighting is somehow necessary for people to fight, then why aren't you conscripting everyone? It's a draft, right? It's not like you're taking everyone into the military. You're just only taking a certain number of people. Furthermore, this is an unfair burden on certain people because not everyone is going to war. Only some people get recruited and then go back, never ever go to war ever again. But some people, just as when the Bush administration went to Iraq, then the conscription has to go to war. So there's not going to be a fair distribution of burden on their side either. So we don't see why it is like fair for the conscription to force some people at some time, random time, to be put to death. So first, let me briefly into why this burden is fair. Because their misconception comes from a fundamental lack of just knowledge and reading statistics. If you know the distribution of population of blacks in general society and compare that to general distribution in the military, there are less number of black people in the US military. There are less number of Latinos in the US military. There are less number of poor background people in the military. Why is that? One, because usually military requires a high school degree to get into a military. Most of these minorities are middle school or high school dropouts. So they can't be eligible to get into the military in the first place. That's why if you see most TV shows and footages of frontline military soldiers, you see white people. You don't see other minorities. The majority of them are white and usually male, so we believe that their distribution is unfairly done on the status quo. What they're going to do with this proposal is very simple. What they're going to do is basically make sure that there are more underprivileged, poor black people who are already suffering from a huge social burden be put into the military and then suffer 6 to 1 year of training. Yeah, that's not so bad, but like if you talk to all those Korean students who enter the military, they don't learn anything, right? They just learn how to be tough, and then that doesn't become useful when they have to work in the service economy where they have to change tables and listen to how to write papers and so forth. That doesn't help these black people gain the necessary kind of skills to succeed in life. So all it is a burden. And also if they have to go to war, they get injured, they are suffering from huge amounts of trauma, then they're less likely to pay for the cost of healthcare and insurance that they will have to pay for. So we believe that this burden is going to be forced upon people that are not volunteer at all. At least under the status quo, people volunteer, get the university degree necessary, and then upgrade themselves in life. With this proposal, there is no return. You don't get anything back. You don't get a university degree. You don't get any payouts. That we think is unfair for poor people in general. If any of you have any points, I'll take it now.
So regardless whether you're rich or poor, you're either coerced by tradition or you're coerced by poverty. How is that legitimate consent?
At least you have chance to say no. They don't have to go to the military, right? You can you can get scholarship through other means. You can actually go to serve tables if you don't want to go to war. But if you're forced to do this proposal, you're forcing all poor people to suffer the same fate and make it even worse. Sorry, I need a stopwatch. Thank you. Right. Now, going to why this will make it impossible to go to war. Because they said it themselves. They're going to make it more difficult to go to wars. The difference is now, it's going to be almost impossible to go to so many wars that is necessary. Like the one in Syria, right? Right now, it's already difficult to go into Syria at all because people are unwilling to sacrifice American blood. Imagine what will happen if they needed to send American troops who are drafted from every single citizen. It's going to be monumentally impossible to get anyone to those areas, and that concern will be not the security of Syria. It will not be how Syrians are murdered and brutal genocide is occurring. It's about, oh, I want to protect my people. And worse, how the politicians want to protect their own seats in their own Congress because they don't want to get dropped out. So the concern will be entirely political and self-serving and not about the regional interest or the national interest that's required. So we believe that is extremely problematic. Sacrificing some people for the sake of sacrificing the Syrians or the Rwandans or the Somalians who are going to be killed in the future, all those conflicts will never be stopped because all countries will be scared to send them. Then what will happen? Because this is where their arguments comes extremely come forward. Because they said somehow that proxy forces and drones are such terrible things, so we should never use them. Well, what do you think the Obama administration is going to do if they can't send troops? They're going to send drones, they're going to send private military contractors to fight these wars, and then there will be more oppression because there's no accountability, there is no checks or balances on those issues. Precisely the point, because Obama has promised to withdraw all troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, the number of PMCs have doubled in those areas. Obama has used more drone strikes, 10 times more than Bush did ever in his entire presidency. We mean that all those unaccountable wars will be done, and all those accountable wars that are shared, the burden is shared by the people that should be, will be not done. If we think that is bad for security, it's bad for the people on the ground. That's why we beg to oppose.
Thank you, Member of Opposition. Now from Government Whip, keep here.
In either model, there will be unpopular wars. But in the model of opening government, when you have people who enter the military, see the war, and then can exit from the war, and then speak about the war, then legitimate wars gain legitimacy, and illegitimate wars gain illegitimacy. The previous speaker said we're never going to fight any war. Absolute bonkers, Mr. Speaker. Because while war-going and warmongering was unpopular because of Iraq and Afghanistan, the American public supported the war in Libya because that war was justified. We think it's most likely possible that we're going to fight the justified wars in our model. That point doesn't stand. There are two basic issues of today's debate. First, is the model legitimate? And second, will it lead to a better military? On the first issue, I'll deal with the legitimacy point coming from the previous speaker. He says, why not conscript everybody if that's the case? Why not everyone? Well, the obvious answer is if you conscript everybody, then no one's left in your country. And that's a security problem in itself, when no one's in America, Mr. Speaker. So I think it's reasonable that we can only conscript a certain population of your state for your state to be functional. Because if a state has no people, that's also a problem in itself, Mr. Speaker. Moreover, he says that your statistic is wrong. It's not all black people, and it's all not like the minority groups who are being conscripted. Even if we agree to that, it doesn't matter. The point wasn't about poor people being coerced. It's about poverty being coercive. It's about tradition being coercive. So this entire idea that these people consent to it anyway, when I'm in a family of rich people whose political career depends on me going to the military, or if I'm a black person in a ghetto whose family's livelihood depends on being able to go to war, doesn't seem like a fairly consensual relationship to me, Mr. Speaker. It's also quite coercive. The difference, as this came out in extension, is in our model, everyone gets a chance to get a feel of what the military is about. And if you happen to be poor and you like the military service, then when you go back, you sign in. If you happen to be rich and you don't like the military service, then you tell your parent that, Dad, it's not for me, I've experienced it myself. These options are not available when your only choice is to sign in permanently or not. Our model, the old model of the opening government never said you're signing into a military career. We said you're signing into a military service. This is a temporary amount of time, Mr. Speaker. We think you can go back. Then they said, no, it's illegitimate because anyway, military personnel can exit the military. Factually wrong, Mr. Speaker. During the Iraqi war, the US government had a policy called the stop-loss policy. When you return to your family, you can be recalled to Iraq at any point in time and you cannot say no by virtue of the signature of signing into that career. That in itself is coercion upon coercion on these individuals. We think it's not that easy to exit the military when the same pressures you're championing exist to these people. Your community will judge you, will be stigmatized, etc. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, Mr. Speaker. We ask the next speaker, what happens then to the big chunk of the middle class who are apathetic about the war, who's neither rich or poor, who are not the target market of these interventions, Mr. Speaker? Then, opening government essentially says, strangely enough, it devalues other jobs. As if other jobs and being in the service for 6 in 1 year is mutually exclusive. I think we can value the heroic championing of our military and the heroic championing of our farmers at the same time. I don't see the mutual exclusivity. In fact, we say you have a responsibility to defend when you can. Because they said, Mr. Speaker, that by contributing to the economy, somehow you're defending. If someone's getting stabbed in front of you, you can't go, oh well, I paid my taxes to the police anyway. That's defending your rights, right? It's absolutely ineffective, Mr. Speaker. You have to have a more active stance in that regard. But then, they accused us of a contradiction. They said, what makes people go to war according to opening government is the fact that people die. No, Mr. Speaker. Robin, in his Prime Minister's speech, said there's a difference between perception and reality. The idea that your parents are afraid that you might die is not the same as the reality when you're there in the front line. The fear that emanates in these people is not necessarily going to materialize. That's what my previous speaker said. Some of you might act as support technicians, or medics, or logistical operators, or truck drivers. Fine and good, you might die, but you won't always die, Mr. Speaker. So there is a fear of dying, but not the absolute reality of death, Mr. Speaker. And we think that's a reasonable thing. You do that when you enter mining, when you enter chemicals, there's always a risk of dying. I don't understand why that's such a massive harm. Yes?
You're objecting to people getting coerced through economic means and the cores of the things that they go through for war. Why are you okay with conscripting random people, poor or rich, and coercing them with the much stronger coercion?
No, I don't think you understand. We support coercion. What we're saying is status quo is coercive in itself. So there's not much differentiation there. That's the stance of government bench. Figure it out. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, we said on closing government that you don't want to fight wars with drones and like PMCs. The response from the previous speaker was this: if your war is unpopular because of the discourse that happens around people potentially dying, then you will resort to proxy wars like drones and PMCs. That's status quo, Mr. Speaker. What will happen in our model is you at least not make the drones and the PMCs the default option of the US government. Because in status quo, because of the lack of troops, that becomes a default option, even in popular wars, Mr. Speaker. Like in the war in Libya, you had drones. Why is that even a legitimate option? And the US government justifies it as we don't have enough troops. That kind of justification is gone when you conscript people because now you have enough troops. Now, why does this help people in general? Because it is the same drones that slaughter Pakistani children which lead to extremism. That's why you are being targeted everywhere in the world. Your embassies are bombed, your Boston marathons explode, Mr. Speaker. These are the kinds of risks that transfer from your fight on the ground to the fight in the homeland. That's why everybody has a responsibility to do something about it, because the methods you are using is causing extremism. That's the reason why we do not support private military companies or drones. We support destroying the rhetoric for drones and private military companies by telling the government you have no excuse to produce these ungodly creatures because you have enough troops. That's something that happens exclusively on government bench. The excuse is gone. It's not the default option. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, they say in the second issue, what leads a better military? Now they say, you don't want to send people unprepared. Look at what happened to the Vietnam War. Exactly, Mr. Speaker. That's what's going to happen. That's not going to happen in our model. Because the Vietnam War was a one-time, big time. Oh, maybe we should conscript people now because we know we're not prepared. We should conscript more people because we're fighting this illegitimate war in Vietnam. What happens in our model is you are systemically trained before you go to war. It is something institutionalized, Mr. Speaker. And if you are untrained and incapable, or if you're not, even if you're crippled, Mr. Speaker, you can have some participation in the war by being a technician, a cook, a healthcare officer, which frees up some of your troops, Mr. Speaker. So we think it's not analogous to Vietnam at all. Besides, in our model, the Vietnam War wouldn't have even happened because people will start questioning the legitimacy of going to proxy war about communism. We think ultimately everyone is served better in our model. Your military is more accountable. We beg to propose.
Thank you, Government Whip. Now I call upon Petition Whip, Koki Sasaki, here.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we have to sacrifice someone. This is absolutely true. But what today's government try to do is randomly pick up someone and send to military and go to war and someone die. This is the best way. And they continuously pushing these kinds of things. But the thing is, my partner especially talking about, under the current situation, bluntly, people going to war or going to military, and these kinds of view of citizens
is a more important or rather better compared to the random picking up, and even if you say no, you have to go to war. Such kind of situation is rather ignore the people's wills or idea or identity, and we say this is not the long way to go. So therefore we say we are very proud to propose the motion. So I have several issues to talk about, but through my speech I want to prove, of course, our paradigm is not the best way, but compared to their paradigm, it is a better way. So that is my only purpose to speak up in this place. So anyway, so let me move on to one by one. So firstly, from the opening comment, we heard about under the current situation, people don't care about the war, and because they don't experience the war, so that is the only reason. And after taking the proposal, because everyone experiences war, suddenly everyone becomes think about the war, and everyone becomes perfectly rational, and that is a better way. I don't think so. Because firstly, their problem itself is a analysis of these kind of things is totally wrong. Why is that? That's simply because, for example, like the Iraqi war. So all people care about the Iraqi war because under the Bush regime, every person living in America actually they enthusiastically support these kinds of war at the first place because the support rate of the Bush is over 80% or so. If you consider these kinds of situations, actually, they care about the war because of the 9/11 war, so forth, and they really think about these kinds of war at the first place. So therefore, the Robbins analysis about they don't care about the war is a totally wrong thing. Rather more they care about the war. And finally they go to the war. And moreover, we say that without the conscription, we finally withdraw from the Iraqi war. Because even if not your son dying, but someone's son dying, the American citizens care about that. Therefore, the American people say we have to withdraw from the Iraqi war. So if you consider about these kinds of situations, the conscription is unnecessary because without conscription, we can care about the war, we can think about the war, or of course, and also we can withdraw from the war. So if you consider about these kind of situations, actually their analysis is doesn't stand. And also, if you're talking about the 3-year war, actually just Obama want to go, but many citizens, like over 90% citizens, against these kinds of wars. So therefore, McCain also against these kinds of things. So if you consider these kinds of situations, actually, the analysis coming from the Robin, I don't want to say that, but he's not here, so I think he's wrong. So therefore, I think there's no necessity to take this proposal as a first place. And secondly, the point coming from the Ryosuke about the social cohesion, the unite people, it's funny, yeah, I know that, but the thing is, I don't want to such kind of unity or society if I have to die or I have to go to very dangerous place. Yeah. Instead of this kinds of die or possibility of die, I don't want to unite or become friends with everyone. If I have to do that, I want to do that, and I'm okay with living alone and drinking or karaoke. Yeah, go.
Okay, thank you for ignoring us because all of your harm is predicated on this extremely shallow premise that you have an extremely high likelihood of death the moment you go to war. I've broken that context by our extension.
I think firstly, I can take the point of information because it's too wrong. And secondly, if you want to talking about your extension, I don't think your analysis as a first place is wrong. Why is that? That's simply because under the current situation, United States making the drones or using the PMC because of lack of soldier. No. Why lack of soldier happened? That's simply because the government cannot kill randomly these kinds of citizens, and to decrease the casualty, actually under the current situation, we are creating the drones. If we can kill randomly these kinds of soldiers, and if there's no criticism coming from the citizens, actually we can send the soldier a lot of and as much as possible. But the problem under the current situation, or why under the current situation, the United States is creating the drone, is because they don't want to kill their own citizens. And even after taking this proposal, that kind of mechanism or structure doesn't change. Furthermore, my partner already told you, after taking this proposal, the people without consent send it to war, randomly killed by taking this proposal. Because even if you say no, you have to go to war because of conscription. And in such kind of situation, rather, United States government have strong incentive to create the drone or using the PMC more and more. And also there is a legitimate excuse as exists. Because by taking this proposal, actually, everyone has the possibility to die, and the United States government can say, okay, let's create a drone, or let's use a PMC, because I want to help you, or I don't want to kill the United States citizen. Also, they can use these kinds of rhetoric, and so therefore, their entire extension is totally doesn't sense. And rather, as my partner told you, it is counterproductive, because after taking proposal, randomly you pick up citizen and send to war, and in such kind of situation, actually, as Robin said, so everyone, every politician care about their shit, and they don't want to lose their job or parliamentary seat. So if you consider this kind of situation, actually, their proposal is rather counterproductive, and their harm is rather increased by taking the proposal. And if you won't go,
I'll keep it simple. Why did people die every time when they joined the military?
I think, firstly, the Robin's point is totally consistent such kind of things, because after taking proposal, dead body coming to here and see it, and suddenly people become rational. That is Robin's argument. I think this is a lying or contradiction, and please listen to Robin's speech. He's a grand finalist of the Australs. Yeah, he's very good. And finally, about the burden sharing, the point coming from entire opposition government. So under the current situation, the government just pushing these, enforcing or imposing these kinds of burden for a particular person. Oh, sorry, after taking the proposal, these kinds of things happen. But the thing is, as my partner already told you, even current situation or even their post paradigm, we have to put or impose burden for everyone or someone. And if you consider this kind of situation, criteria to picking up someone should be based on people's will or free choice of these kinds of things. And the random picking and ignoring the consent or will of citizen is rather bad. So therefore we say we are very proud to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Opposition Whip. それでは今から鍋島君にこのラウンドがどういったものであったかをちょっと解説していただきたいと思います。鍋島君、お願いします。
それは入れた方がいい。夜中。それは入れた方がいい。